Mountain Blade is a game that there's not really anything else like. The only other game that I can really think of that comes close is actually Star Sector, even though that is of course sci-fi and in space, but it does have a similar gameplay loop with the trading and the roaming and the gathering your fleet and everything like that. But really, Mountain Blade is the medieval sandbox simulator thing. There's not really anything else out there that comes close to capturing exactly what it does. It has the strategy and economic layers of something like a 4X strategy, but the sort of troop gathering and commanding logistics aspects of something like the Total War series, but all wrapped with this like third-person action real-time combat system and stuff that nothing else that really does what it does has. It's sort of something that does what a lot of other games do, but all at once in a way that is pretty unique to itself. And the second game, the sequel, I guess I should say, because it's not really the second one, but yeah. Anyway, Mountain Blade 2, Bannerlord, has been wished for a long time. It's something that they have announced has been worked on and has had difficulties and is being worked on again and is being redone and stuff like that for a long time. And a lot of us were actually kind of afraid that it may become vaporware at some point, that it would actually be going through such a difficulty of development that it may actually be, if not abandoned, take a very, very long time. But here we are, and it turns out that it's actually available for play right now. This is, of course, Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. It is finally in early access. And it's actually very playable as well. I think a lot of us, including myself, were really happy to see that they decided to go the early access route, because with the troubled development of games like this, it's nice to see just in any form, you know, it's nice to see it available at all, and the early access, I believe, helps them fine-tune a final product, rather than second-guessing themselves repeatedly, which I believe would probably be quite easy to do, especially in a large, sandboxy kind of game. It allows them to sort of say, alright, this is the solidified base, how do we need to build on it from now to actually come up with a finished product? And I think that early access is a really good system to actually do that with. And the game right now is in a beta state. They are expecting, they said, to be in early access for about a year. They're not going to give like a specific deadline because, as they say on their page, it may actually negatively impact the game to have such a deadline. So instead they're just saying roughly a year-ish about is probably around the time it will take, which is pretty fair for a game of this size and complexity. And what's available right now is kind of what you're seeing in the background. I'm deliberately just kind of screwing around in the sandbox because I believe that to be pretty representative of what the average player is going to do if they were to pick it up right now. A lot of just sort of messing about in the open world, because that's mostly what's available. There is, you know, not like a huge story campaign or anything that's available right now. There is a story, but it is threadbare right now. It is not finished, and there is not a huge amount to it yet. It will, of course, be expanded on and finished later, but that really means that, for the most part, if you are to get it right now, you're going to be doing stuff like this. You're just going to be messing around, raiding towns, declaring wars, taking prisoners, stuff like that. So how is the base gameplay? Well, it is, I mean, if you've played Mountain Blade, you know what it's like. It is a very solid third-person action combat with like troop commanding and a lot of logistical stuff, like, you know, kingdom support and trying to go around representing your kingdom or becoming a mercenary or becoming a vassal and stuff like that. It does have that 4X strategy layer of each kingdom having different rulers and different clans, and you are a clan. You can be an independent clan if you want, or you can actually join with the other kingdoms and help in their wars and help them take prisoners and help defend their castles and actually eventually get your own castle and your own like fiefdoms and have your own rulership eventually if you choose to do so. So it's quite a wide open sandbox. This is definitely one of the purest forms of sandbox. That's what Mountain Blade has always been. Although there is, of course, a structured story in the other games, it's more like an excuse to mess around in the sandbox than it is like a big narratively focused experience. You know, like the main aspect of Mountain Blade is the stories that you'll tell your friends of what happened to you. It's all about the sandbox experience that you have. And very much like a game of Civilization or something like that, you know, there is like a goal to reach at the end, but actually getting there is the main fun part. And that is exactly the case here as well. There's really a lot to do, surprisingly. Even though it's in early access, there is a pretty significant amount of like strategy layering and stuff like that. So you have already a pretty robust trading system with workshops that you can buy if you want to, various kinds of workshops. You may, for instance, go to a town, buy their wool weaving workshop, and then sell them a bunch of sheep, or make sure they have a lot of access to sheep so that they can get wool cheaply, so that when they sell it, they can sell it for a much more of a profit and give you a lot more money. So there is like a pretty significant economic strategy layer to it already. And you can do all sorts of other things too, like trade goods yourself or buy various workshops in various areas to try and create like supply lines. You can even lead caravans yourself. You can actually just escort other caravans, or you can create one and actually lead it and be like a big regional trading caravan, which is pretty cool. I would actually say that the economic simulation and the whole trading aspect is probably the most so far finished part of the game so far. It's pretty robust already, there's a lot to it. And of course, as is the case with a lot of sandbox things like this, and with the previous Mount & Blade games, if you want, you can just choose to ignore that entirely. You can go and do something else. You can actually not take part in economic logistics and trading and stuff if you don't want to, but it is there. That's actually, in my opinion, the strongest aspect of Mount & Blade as a series, is the fact that there are so many different layers. Each of them are actually pretty deep, very complex, but you don't really have to pay attention to any of them that you don't want to. There is a pretty complex economic simulation here, but if you're not in it for that, then you don't have to do it. There is a lot of troop logistics in here if you want to create large armies and stuff, but if you're not into creating huge armies and roaming as a giant force, you don't have to do that either. And this game does definitely carry that flag on from its predecessors. There's quite a bit of complexity in each different system, but you don't necessarily have to delve into every single one of them if they're not your thing to still get a pretty good experience, I suppose is the hallmark of a nice sandbox. Being able to actually dig in whatever corner that you want and ignore the others if you want to, and still get a good experience. There is, of course, lots of combat if you wish to do that, and it's pretty fun so far, but a bit buggy. I've had some pretty hilarious bugs, honestly, with the combat. One involving every time I smacked someone on this particular map, they T-posed and became like a weird, hairy, shirtless man model for like just a split second. I don't know why that happened, but that was kind of fascinating. And I've also had a couple of other more smaller bugs, like the ground kind of flashing in between grassy and snowy textures occasionally. And also, I'm not sure. I think I'm just kind of bad at the combat sometimes. Sometimes I really feel that I should have hit certain attacks, and other times it's obvious why I missed. So I'm not going to blame the game for that, because I think I just have bad aim. But it's something that I've got to get used to again, because I haven't played a combat system like this in a long time. If you've never played Mount & Blade, but you want to, understand the combat system, if you've ever played something like Chivalry or War of the Roses, it's like that. It's a directional-based combat system where, depending on what weapons and shields and everything you're using, you can move your mouse in different directions and then hold the attack button to prepare different strikes in those directions. And if you are on the receiving end, you need to guard in the sort of opposing direction to make sure that you actually block the attack. It's a very physical combat system where the bladed parts of weapons actually need to hit different aspects of the enemy, and it does simulate where you hit, and it even simulate stuff like speed. So for instance, if you are riding on a horse, you swipe someone right in the head with a sword, it's going to do tremendous amounts of damage because it's going to be a head hit. It's going to use their head armor as damage mitigation, not their body armor or anything, because it is locationally based. It's going to add the speed of your horse into the equation and amplify the damage and stuff like that. And each weapon does have its own characteristics because of this, their own reach and speed and swing arcs and what directions they can even swing and block from in different circumstances. I should also mention the influence system is pretty cool, something that allows you to affect your kingdom and the world around you. You can call for votes on specific policies and try and give other villages and fiefs and stuff to other kingdoms for diplomacy reasons. You can even marry for like alliance reasons. You can try and get your own castle, as I mentioned. You can do other things like that. There's actually quite a bit of influence-related stuff you can do in terms of either just trying to change the face of your kingdom by calling for votes on new policies, or just restructuring what fiefs belong to who and things like that, and even taking prisoners and stuff to affect the nobles of other kingdoms and see what you can do in terms of the influence that they regionally have or that you have, and even other things in the vein of, for instance, declaring war and peace, if you wish, on entire kingdoms. So that's pretty cool. There's a lot of chaos sometimes, as you can probably tell in the background right now, because there can be huge numbers of troops on the battlefield at any given time. I will say that that is one aspect that is definitely early access feeling, is the performance. It's very odd. There are some maps where huge numbers of soldiers can be present and it doesn't mess with the frame rate that much. I, for instance, did a castle raid where there were like 300 defenders and like 280 attackers. There was a massive amount of troops, and the frame rate was fine. It never dipped. It was perfectly acceptable. And then I was on a map somewhat like this one, where there were about 150 attackers and about 120, 130 defenders or so, and it like tanked the frame rate down into like a dozen frames a second or so, like 8 to 12 I think was the average, for a good couple of minutes until it finally recovered once a bunch of people died. So the performance is a little bit spotty here and there, which I mean is to be expected of an early access game. Optimization passes and stuff are generally some of the last things that are done to a game because the content has to actually be finished in order to be optimized. So yeah, it is definitely not the most optimized game out there. I still think it works pretty well, like surprisingly well, considering the absolute scale of things that can happen, but there are some instances where clearly a lot of troops on screen will tank your frame rate, so you gotta be careful about that. So yeah, although it's not finished right now, it's fun. It's Mount and Blade, and I haven't played Mount and Blade in a long time, so it's really cool to actually be part of it again, to be present again in a new Mount and Blade game, to actually be able to say there is a new Mount and Blade game is just awesome. And you know, I've already had some fun stories of my own, like joining the Vlandians, and then seeing, once I finally became a vassal, seeing one of our bigger cities being besieged, and I had like 70 people, and they had like 120, but I was like, oh man, there's no one near, I gotta try it. So I tried it, and we absolutely destroyed them, and we were able to actually dig in and survive the siege. I only lost like about a dozen people, and they almost lost everyone, and we took them prisoner. I then ransomed the prisoner to one of our castles for, or donated the prisoner to one of our castles for favor, went in deep into the enemy territory, into their kingdom, and actually decided to ransack some of their towns as punishment, and got like 3 good raids in before I was chased away by a huge army. And that's just kind of what Mount and Blade is about. It's about this big sandbox and exploring all of its different possibilities in whatever way that you want. And even though it is in early access, there are still quite a bit of possibilities to explore. If you do want to just look at the game, just wait, do wishlist it, I would say, because that does actually help the developers out, and it means that you are very aware of new updates, and as it closes in on release and larger updates and stuff like that, you'll, be notified. If you do want to actually jump into it, then do expect some early access jank, because it is definitely unfinished, but I do believe that this is probably the best possible way for this game to go, given its very long development cycle. I think finishing off its development cycle as a sort of crowdsourced bug fixing and content additions and stuff like that is a really good idea, and I'm glad that this is the route they're actually going. I think it'll overall improve the finished product once we get there. And in my opinion, one of the best parts is they're already supporting modding. They are very well aware of how much modding actually improved and affected the long-term sales of the other Mount and Blade games. Modding is a huge aspect of those games. So I think it's really awesome, and just always worth applauding whenever you see a game that's in this early of a state already supporting modding. It has an official mod page in its launcher. It has just official mod support with updates adding new technicalities for modders to mess with and stuff like that. It's already moddable, which is awesome. It's not really so much about how many mods are available right now, so much as it's about the fact that they're allowing it already and are very aware of how important that is to the community. This is going to be a community finished product, you could say, and I think that is probably the best possible outcome for a Mount and Blade game. So yeah, that's Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord as it is right now, a really solid combat and economic and troop movement and taking prisoners simulator that needs a lot of work, but she'll be a lot of fun when it's done. The link is, as always, in the description below this video if you want to look at it yourself. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.